Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing another guides, tips, and tricks video. This time we're talking about quirks and quirk management. So let's just do a brief overview of quirks before I get into the individual quirks. So quirks are controlled and managed mostly in the Sanitarium. The Sanitarium has a number of upgrades. Let me kill the webcam just temporarily here that you can upgrade it from. The first one here, the treatment library, is reducing the cost of removing or locking in or adding, basically. So removing or permanently stabilizing quirks on your characters. That has 5 tiers of upgrade. Those are all just reduced by cost. And then you can upgrade the number of places in the Sanitarium you can do this from. It starts at 1, you can bring it up to 3 if you want, and that's the number of patient cells, and you get the upgrades here and then at here, right there. So these level 2 and level 4 increase the number of treatment ward slots that allow you to do that. Okay, so what can you do here? So this is one of the ones that a lot of people don't know, and that is that you can lock in positive quirks on a character. And this is simple. It's just like removing negative quirks. If you bring a guy, drag him into the Sanitarium, you have basically three things you can do. The first is you can remove a negative quirk, and it'll give you a price range. And that's just going to take a week, so you have to have them locked in while you go run a mission. At the end of that mission, when you come out, their quirk is going to be gone, the one you've chosen to remove negatively. You can also lock in a positive quirk. So if I wanted to, you see what it goes from. You can actually see one that's here already, which is Hard Noggin. Hard Noggin's been locked in, so it's permanently a part of this character. It will never leave. And why you would lock in positive quirks is because once you have 5 positive quirks, if you gain another positive quirk, it removes one of these randomly. And there are some positive quirks that are much better than negative quirks, so you want to potentially lock in the quirks that you care about on your characters. All right, so you can lock in a positive quirk. It's much more expensive if you look at the cost. The cost does scale with the characters. As the character gets to a higher level, the cost of removing negative quirks or locking in positive quirks gets more expensive. So the earlier you can do this in the character's life, the less expensive it is for you to do that. And because it takes a week, it's more efficient, if possible, to do both simultaneously, which is to lock in a positive quirk you care about while simultaneously removing a negative quirk that you want to get rid of. I do a lot of quirk management in my games. My general rule of thumb is I would like to have no negative quirks on my characters, or rather no influential negative quirks. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we do the actual review of all the quirks. And I want to lock in all the positive quirks that I consider valuable on my characters. So I do this a hell of a lot. All right, so this is how you manage quirks once you have quirks. This is what you do to keep the ones you care about and get rid of the ones you don't care about. You use the Sanitarium essentially. But let's go talk about A, how you acquire quirks in the first place, and B, which quirks are good. So this is an important thing. So there are a number of items in the game you can interact with that give you quirks, and some of them are worth doing, especially if you can get through the items that have a high chance of giving you positive quirks at very low chance or no chance of giving you negative quirks. Those are almost always worth interacting with. However, the primary way that you will get quirks on most of your characters is just running missions. And how it works is it's based on whether or not you completed a quest objective or not completed a quest objective. So this means if you finish a quest and you succeed in the mission, you finish the quest, you have a 45% chance of getting a positive quirk. And you have a 25% chance of getting a negative quirk that increases by basically 1/4 of a point per level of stress you have. So if you come out of a dungeon afflicted, I'm pretty sure this caps at 100, although I'm not entirely certain about that, but I'm pretty sure it caps at 100. But let's say you come out of a dungeon with exactly 100 stress. So you become afflicted, you're at 100 stress, you walk out of that dungeon, you have a 25 plus 1/4 of 100, which is also 25, so you have a 50% chance of getting a negative quirk. That's if you succeeded on that mission. If you didn't succeed, your chance of a negative quirk starts at 40 and goes up by almost 25% per point, and then also your chance of getting a positive quirk actually decreases by the amount of stress you have. So this is the primary way that characters gain quirks. To the best of my knowledge, the quirk you gain is entirely random unless certain items have specific quirks associated with them, but I'm pretty sure the missions you come out of it's almost entirely random for how those quirks are done. My general gameplay, I manage the hell out of quirks. I really think they are, the way I think about them, and I suggest you do the same, I recommend that you do the same, is you compare the bonuses you're getting off quirks to item bonuses. And if you think about it that way, you can lock in up to 3 positive quirks, and you could potentially have up to 2 more positive quirks on top of the ones you've locked in. So you could hypothetically have 5 positive quirks that were all impactful to the character, or up to 5 negative quirks. And quirks seem to be about as valuable as a green item, maybe a little bit more. So on average, a good quirk is something like the addition of +1 green item to your character. Sometimes even a little bit better than that. Sometimes as good as a blue or even an orange item. So in other words, if I can lock in 3 positive quirks and maybe have 1 random positive quirk on top of that, if I'm running 4 positive quirks, that's the rough equivalent of 4 more items, or somewhere in the vicinity of 2 to 4 more good items. That's really, really impactful. If you think about that when you're encountering bosses or you're encountering the end missions in the game, the Darkest Dungeon missions, if you can have quirks that are relevant to the types of enemies and the types of situations you're going to be encountering, it's as good as sometimes doubling or even tripling the number of items that you can bring to that mission, the number of actual trinkets that you can bring to that mission. And that's hugely impactful. So I really recommend this. I see a lot of streamers, a lot of players who don't manage their negative quirks in particular, who have characters who have essentially a bunch of really bad negative quirks, and those negative quirks are essentially subtracting item slots. So if you have a quirk that gives you 20% extra stress versus an enemy the type that you're going to be fighting, that's essentially removed the stress resist item from your inventory, or added a stress increasing item to your inventory. And that's, when you think of it that way, you start to see the real power of quirks. If you start measuring them against the items that you are struggling for across the course of the game and setting your characters with to go fight certain bosses, etc., you can start to see just how powerful quirks are. So I strongly recommend you look at it that way when you're judging how good is a quirk, how worthwhile is it to lock it in or have it removed off my character. I think it's one of the most hidden or most overlooked strategies in Darkest Dungeon to be good at quirk management. All right, kind of a long intro for this. We have a lot of quirks to get through, so I'm going to try to do them in one video. So this will go a little bit longer than I might like for a video, but there's no real way to break this up. It's all essentially the same stuff. So let's get started. Beast Hater. Beast Hater is an amazing quirk. All of the haters, except Unholy Hater, so Beast Hater and Eldritch Hater, are really, really good. Human Hater, Mankind Hater is kind of not so good, and Unholy Hater is not so good. So I guess 2 of them are really good and 2 of them aren't really good. And why that is true, and this is situationally true, is that in the Darkest Dungeons, in Darkest Dungeon 1, 2, 3, 4, the types of enemies you are fighting are disproportionately Eldritch. A huge number of them are Eldritch, and almost all the bosses are Eldritch. And a fairly large number of them are Beast. If not almost all of them, in fact, are Beast. So you're fighting mostly Eldritch, with the rest of them being mostly Beast. If an enemy is both a Beast and an Eldritch, and there's a lot of enemies like that have multiple classifications, if you have multiple Hater quirks, they both trigger. So Beast Hater will trigger versus an enemy that's a Beast Eldritch, and Eldritch Hater, for example, would trigger versus a character that is Beast Eldritch. So what it comes down to is the quirks that are specific to a type are, of course, going to be better versus that type of enemy. And the only dungeons that you have to complete in this game to win the game are the Darkest Dungeons. And those ones have a disproportionately large number of Eldritch and Beast enemies in there. So, and especially the bosses. Almost all the bosses are Eldritch in those dungeons, with some of them being Beast as well. So there are scenarios in which, for example, Mankind Hater or an Unholy Hater would be very, very good, but they tend to be level 5 or level 3 boss fights that are not in the Darkest Dungeon. So it's essentially optional content. If you're planning on fighting that optional content, they can be as good as they might otherwise be. But if you're just attempting to beat the game, then all you really care about are Beast and Eldritch. All right, let's go through. We'll go through the positives first, and then we'll come over to actually, maybe we'll do the pairings. This is set up as pairings. Never mind. We'll do the pairings, and then we'll keep going. So Beast Hater, really solid. Fear of Beast, of course, gives you. This is Fear of Beast is actually worse than how good. If you look at Beast Hater on a positive scale and then compare the magnitude of how positive that is versus the magnitude of how negative Fear of Beast is actually slightly more powerful than Beast Hater, because an accuracy bonus and a stress bonus are more important than a damage bonus and a stress bonus. But still, damage and stress are really, really good bonuses. Beast Slayer is phenomenal. The crit part, I'll take it or leave it. I mean, it's a nice little bonus, but it's not really the part that I care about, is the accuracy. This essentially frees up an item slot for me. I think accuracy is one of the, if not the best attribute in the game, it's probably second best attribute in the game. That you really want to itemize your characters to hit that hit cap, so your characters will consistently be doing the roles and the actions that you're assigning them to. Consistency is huge in this game. Inconsistency is what gets you killed. Consistency means you can have predictable battles with fairly predictable outcomes. And giving you a character accuracy on a quirk that means you don't have to bring a trinket is absolutely amazing. So I would consider any of the haters and slayers to be extremely, extremely powerful versus their types, and this type in particular, Beast, to be really good. Zoophobia is really, really bad. This is one of the ones that I absolutely want to remove as soon as possible, and that is this is because beasts, again, are an important element of the end game. You're going to be facing them a lot. You don't want your characters to be taking extra stress from that, especially on missions like the Darkest Dungeons, where stress is a big portion of the dungeon, where part of the rules of the dungeon are essentially, the challenge of the dungeon, rather, is beating the huge amount of stress you're going to be accumulating. This does remind me of one thing I forgot to mention earlier. How does a negative quirk get locked in? I don't know the percentage chance, but basically every time you go on a mission with a character who has a negative quirk that's not locked in, it has a chance to become locked in. And you don't want to let very powerful negative quirks get locked in because they're much more expensive to remove. And you may encounter items in a dungeon that allow you to remove it, but it will be, that's a percent-based thing, not a guarantee. So a lot of times I won't even bring characters on missions that have extremely bad negative quirks until I can get them into the Sanitarium to remove that, because I don't want to have a chance for a very, very powerful negative quirk to be locked onto my characters, like Zoophobia, for example. All right, Clotter. Again, an absolutely amazingly powerful quirk. This is bleeds and blights are the number one way that my characters die in Darkest Dungeon. It is almost never just I get hit by a bunch of huge attacks and then die. It's almost always I get hit by huge attacks or multiple crits or something, or multiple attacks, and a dot gets put on them, and then when they're at 0 health, they get tested on death's door by the dot. Clotter lets you resist the bleed dots, and bleed dots are actually much more common than blight dots in this game right now, especially with all the Darkest Dungeon content, Crimson Court content. You're gonna be bled a lot, and being able to resist those is preemptively a way to resist having to prevent getting yourself in a situation where you have a death's door check. I lock Clotter in almost across the board on my characters. Almost every character I think Clotter's good for. Beast Hater, of course, all your damage dealers are going to like this, but pretty much everyone's going to like this as well because it has that stress reduction. Beast Slayer, same type of deal. Pretty much everybody needs accuracy, and this is as good on the character classes that don't do a lot of attacking because it lets you itemize for things that they might want to do instead, like healing. So all of these are quirks I would put on pretty much everybody. Clutch Hitter, I guess I should do it this way. Anemic, by that same logic, is very, very dangerous. It sets you up into positions where your characters might die when they might not have otherwise. I would be very, very careful of allowing that to be locked in. All right, Clutch Hitter and Dud Hitter. These are less care about, mostly because the crit chance in of itself isn't super important. It is nice when it happens, but it's not reliable enough to count on, and since I can't count on it, I just plan on it not happening. Certainly crits are nice when they do happen, especially in race fights where I'm racing like a boss or something. Just a couple extra crits is great. But I don't really like a quirk that is situationally useful and then only triggers when I'm below half health. Certainly, I would consider this a decent quirk if I got it, but I wouldn't waste my money locking it in. There's just better quirks to be locked in for and more consistent quirks. Same with Dud Hitter. I don't like it, but it's not the end of the world if I get it. I will go out of my way to get rid of it, but I probably won't be devastated. I won't throw the character out if I get this locked in. Cove Adventurer. Minus 20% stress received while in the Cove. Versus Cove Phobe. I don't lock in any of the adventurer quirks. They're nice to have, and sometimes, especially if I'm doing a boss fight in one of these areas, I may pull in a character who has an adventurer quirk, because the extra stress reduction is nice. 20% is a fairly big amount. But the thing is, I'm often choosing missions based on the item they give me, or the boss I need killed, or because it's a Darkest Dungeon mission, in which case I have to go there and the adventure quirks don't help me. In other words, I need my characters flexible enough to go to lots of different locations. It's difficult to build a character just specifically set up for the Cove. So I guess in that sense, I'm not really thrilled about this quirk. I don't really go out of my way to lock it in. But I suppose if you see like a Plague Doctor with this quirk, for example, who does very, very well naturally in the Cove already, it could be a little bit higher value for them, but probably still wouldn't lock it in. Same with Cove Phobe. This one's a little bit worse for the same reason that this isn't that good, which is your characters are often going to need to be able to go to all the dungeons. That makes Cove Phobe a little bit more annoying because I'm often going to need to go to all the dungeons. I don't want to have a certain dungeon where I'm weaker in. So this one, again, is something I would lock. I would try to get rid of as soon as possible, but not so caring about that. Deadly, I don't care about at all. The 1% crit chance is super, super minuscule. It's not a big deal. I won't lock it in. Misses the spot, I will get rid of just because it's a negative quirk. There's another strategy for removing all your negative quirks, and that is if you do get a negative quirk locked in accidentally, and then one that's particularly impactful, if you remove all the other negative quirks and then you interact with the curio that lets you remove a negative quirk, like Coral in the Cove or the Scrolls in the Warrens, or the Eldritch Altar. When you encounter that, if you only have one negative quirk, it makes it a 100% chance to remove the negative quirk. If you have two negative quirks, it's now a 50-50 if you get the one you care about versus the one you don't. So in general, I try to remove all negative quirks, but this is not a particularly bad one overall. Eagle Eye. We've already talked about Clutch Hitter. This is a much 3 crit is a lot more than 1 crit, of course, but it's still not that big a deal. This is something I would consider for like an Arbalist or a Grave Robber or something like that. But I don't hugely care about this skill as a whole. Flawed Release, similar. It's just crit chance. It's not that big a deal. It matters, but it's not consistent enough for me to care too much. Of course, I would remove it. It's a negative quirk, but not that big a deal. Early Riser. I really like speed quirks. Speed is an expensive attribute to pick up in the game. So speed quirks are really good. There's a couple times I don't like them. I don't like my DPS to be like 11 or 12 or 13 speed very often, because especially if it's permanent and not based on a buff, because I don't want them going so much faster than my healer. When you get on Death's Door, you have a -5 speed buff. And what I would really like to have happen is if at the end of the round, like a couple enemies crit my guy, and let's say at the end of the round, my healer's already gone, and some enemy crits my DPS like twice and puts him at 0 health. What I don't want to have happen is the start of the next round. I don't want that character to go before my healer, because if that character goes before my healer and also had a dot on them, then they roll against Death's Door. There's a chance, and it's a pretty decent chance, it's like a 33% base chance or something, that character just dies, and there's nothing I can do about it at that point. So I love speed quirks and I love speed items, but I am sometimes a little conscientious of how fast the character is. I don't want them being much faster than the healer. So speed quirks, a lot of characters I really like. Certainly characters that have a lot of impact at the early part of a fight. For example, Plague Doctors, it's amazing to be very, very fast on. Any DPS, that's amazing to be very fast on. Any class that uses riposte, particularly Highwaymen, it's really good to go first because you're going to get the maximum value out of that. Any stunner you have, it's really good to go first. Any healer you have, it's really nice to be faster because then you can have the entire speed of your comp be faster and still not run into the problems with Death's Door. In other words, speed quirks are really good. Of course, this is going to be a light specific one. If you're using a game where the light is more variable, it's not such a big deal. And if you're using a game and you're playing no light, of course, it makes no difference whatsoever. But you can control the light, and you can control the light in the times when it matters, especially boss fights. So having, although as I say that, I'll talk about that in just a second. So the fact that you can control the light means you can get basically a guaranteed 2 speed, which is awesome. Now, boss fights are one of the places where it's least important to have a certain speed, with maybe the exception of the Swine God. So a lot of times the speed isn't relevant to the boss fight, but it is relevant to all the trash pulls until you get to the boss fight. Same by that logic, Nocturnal is a big deal. I don't want negative speed quirks on my characters ever. Speed is probably it's accuracy and speed are probably the 2 I care about most, followed maybe by stress as the 3rd of the most important quirks the most important attributes in the game. So I really don't want negative speed quirks on my characters. All right, Eldritch Hater is exactly like Beast Hater, except there are probably slightly more high-value Eldritch targets than there are high-value Beast targets, but those 2 are basically equal in value, the Eldritch Hater and the Beast Hater stuff. So super important to get this quirk. If you see this quirk, I pretty much lock this quirk in, and Eldritch Slayer, Eldritch Hater, Beast Slayer, and Beast Hater are pretty much auto locks for me. I pretty much always lock these quirks in on any character who has them because they're so damn good. By the same logic, Fear of Eldritch is extremely bad. Eldritch Slayer, amazing. Already talked about why. Accuracy is good on pretty much everybody. And the crit chance I don't care that much about, but I would have done it just for the 10 accuracy alone. Evasive. I don't care a lot about dodge, especially such a small amount of dodge as 5 dodge. If I had to say which characters this would be better on, it would be characters who already have high dodge, who are basically going to deal with the fact that enemies have X, Y, Z, X accuracy. And if you douse the light, they get more accuracy at harder levels, etc. So when I pick this quirk, and I never lock this quirk in, but if I do lock this quirk in, it would be on a character who already had very high dodge, who was going to be able to take advantage of more dodge, as opposed to a character who had lower dodge, who even with some more dodge won't have enough dodge to actually dodge an enemy's attack. Say that a couple times quick, because dodge was used like a bazillion times in there. But you guys probably understand what I'm talking about when I say that by now. All right, Clumsy. Don't really care. Again, it's more devastating on a high dodge character because he might actually have had some use out of his dodge. It's less devastating on a character who already has very low dodge because they were getting no value out of that dodge already. Hard Noggin, I particularly like this on healers, but I also like this on characters that use guards or characters that use riposte. In other words, characters who need to be able to act. All your characters need to be act, so it's not a bad quirk on anybody, but characters where it's particularly important they be able to continue acting despite being potentially stunned. This is an amazing quirk in those scenarios. So healers, highwaymen, men-at-arms, and houndmasters, it's all really, really good to have plus stun resist. And by that same logic, I don't want negative stun resist on anybody whatsoever, but I particularly don't want it on those classes. This is another one of these abilities that is extremely good on any fight where the enemies use stuns, like Swine God with Wilbur stunning everybody, or anything in the Darkest Dungeon where there's a number of stunning enemies as you approach the Darkest Dungeon 1 and Darkest Dungeon 2. It's very, very nice to have these stun resists. Irrepressible. I think almost nothing of this quirk. I would not go out of my way to lock this in. I think it's one of the weaker positive quirks. Basically, you start with I think in an equal level dungeon to your character, I think you start with a 25% chance to have a virtue. So this would move it up to a 30. I believe it caps at 65%, is my understanding. But I don't care. 5% is a very minuscule amount of change in how often I'll have an affliction, or excuse me, how often I'll have a virtue as opposed to an affliction, and it's just not worth the slot that I waste to lock it in. Same with Mercurial. I don't like it in the scenarios where in the shitty scenarios where you reach 100 stress in a mission that is really important, you certainly don't want to have less of a chance of becoming virtuous, but the impact is pretty small either way, so most of the time it won't have mattered anyways. I'll remove it, but it's not such a big deal. Last Gasp. This one is a very dangerous quirk. So +1 speed is not a lot of change in speed. Most of the items in this game, as well as most of the other quirks, will give you a magnitude of 2, which means that +1 is only half as effective as that. But I don't like a quirk that makes me go faster when I'm very low health. Certainly when I'm at low health, it's nice if I can beat the enemy in terms of who goes first for that turn order. That's great. But but I only want to do that when I'm not at 0 health. When I'm at 0 health, I do not want to be faster ever. I don't want my character to be proportionately faster when he's about to die than the healer. So I don't like Last Gasp. I almost consider Last Gasp a noob trap in the sense that it will sometimes get your characters killed when they wouldn't have died not having this quirk. And that doesn't seem like a very good quirk to want to lock into my characters. So I don't like this. I don't like this quirk at all. Winded I do the opposite with this. Whereas some of the time Last Gasp will get me killed and some of the time Winded will save me. A lot of the times, Winded is just a -1 speed buff on rounds where I don't want it to be. So I remove this one. I don't actively go out of my way to get rid of this one, but I am aware that it has a chance to kill my characters. So just something to think about. I don't like either of those quirks is the basic take home from that. Lurker, 10% damage is a very, very small amount of damage. And this is a situational damage buff, so it's only a damage buff when you're using no light. In no light runs, I will lock this on characters that are almost entirely damage dealers. So things like Arbalists, Grave Robbers, Hellions to some degree. I'll lock this in on primary damage dealers and not feel too bad about it, but it's no way near as good as the Beast Slayers and Eldritch Haters and this type of stuff, because it's only 10% damage, and really 10% damage is not as valuable as 10 accuracy, it's not as valuable as 15% stress resist, it's not as valuable as 15% damage, it's not as valuable as 2 speed, it's just not that big a deal overall. But if you can get a couple of these, if you can get like a range damage, like I think it's called Unerring, plus Lurker, plus a Hater quirk, and suddenly you're coming in at plus 45% damage, or 35% damage rather, that starts to be impactful as a whole. So it's a decent quirk. I lock it in sometimes, but it depends on the character. And by that same logic, Night Blindness, I don't want negative damage quirks in anybody. It just feels like something I could remove that gives me a negative item value at no real reason to keep it. But some classes I don't really care about it on are potentially the Plague Doctor, where all of his damage basically is dot related. But mostly I don't want that. Mankind Hater. We've talked about the Beast Hater and Eldritch Haters already, but let's talk about Mankind Hater. The vast majority of your enemies you're facing in all the hardest areas are not humanoid, with maybe the exception of V-Wolf's Dungeon. So I don't really care about this quirk. I don't go out of my way to get rid of it, but I don't lock it in either. Fear of Mankind, there are enough enemies that random spawn across the course of a dungeon that do try to keep Fear of Mankind from getting locked in, but then again, I try to remove pretty much all of my negative quirks. It's just not that impactful. Same with Manslayer, by that logic, and same with Automatonophobia. Automatonophobia, I think is how you say that. I don't want a plus stress quirk ever being locked in on any of my characters. But again, most of the enemies you're going to be facing at the critical times are not going to be human. Natural Eye. 5 accuracy for ranged attacks. This is pretty bad. There's only a couple classes this is decent on, and they're the classes that are almost entirely ranged attack dealers. This is all right on the Vestal, and it's all right on the Arbalist, and it's pretty much not that good on everybody else. I'm trying to think if there's any exception, maybe Plague Doctor. But a lot of characters are either both ranged and melee attacks, like the Occultist or the Grave Robber, where it's a combination of lunge plus dagger throw, or it's a combination of sacrificial stab as well as Eldritch Artillery or the stun or whatever it's called. So a lot of times, even if I have this quirk, I still have to itemize my guys for accuracy because I need the accuracy anyways, which means this quirk tends to be pretty redundant. So mostly I don't think very highly of this. There's only a couple classes where that's true. So most of the times it's not impactful. On the opposite side, Lazy Eye is really much more bad than this was good because you don't want a -5 accuracy penalty on an item, on a attribute that you really care about. So I remove that very, very heavily. Natural Swing is slightly better than Natural Eye for the reasons we just talked about, and it's sometimes good on character classes that you just don't have enough item slots to do all the things they need to do. Like a slow healer, like a Vestal, is often going to itemize speed, often going to itemize stress resist, and often going to itemize plus healing. Sometimes then it can be really, really nice if you have accuracy built into your character quirks as opposed to having to put an item on to also give you accuracy, because you will sometimes want to stun or sometimes want to do damage with something like a Vestal, and it is nice that it's all types of accuracy, not just ranged or melee. By that same logic, the Yips is very, very bad. Get rid of the Yips as soon as you can. Night Owl. We've talked a little bit about speed already. It's a similar thought. If you're running a no-light run, +2 speed is good. If you're running a high torches or just variant light, this is going to be less useful. But 2 speed is very valuable. Just be careful of being too fast relative to your healer. By the same logic, Diurnal is terrible. Speed's a very, very valuable attribute. If you can go ahead of your opponents reliably, you will not have to deal with a lot of their attacks. There's a lot of extra actions you'll get off relative to them. Remember, the whole goal of any Darkest Dungeon fight is to limit, to reduce to as low as possible the number of actions that the most dangerous enemies have, and then increase to the maximum number of actions that you need to full heal and full stress heal. So that's what you're trying to do in every Darkest Dungeon fight, and this is going to hurt you doing that. On Guard, I really like, although I really like it only on a couple classes. I really like it on Stunners. I really like it on AoE classes like Plague Doctors or Hellions, and I really like it on damage dealers who can do damage to the back ranks. So there's a fair number of guys I like it on, and I don't care about the 5 dodge at all. I just care about 4 speed. This is a really good quirk. Really, really good because it has no downside. Sometimes speed quirks have a downside of it. You'll go faster than your healer and you'll sometimes die. But on the first round, that's never going to be applicable. So this is just speed, and it's a lot of speed, and it's at the cost of, there's no downside with that. I really like this quirk, and it's pretty good to lock in on a number of classes. Just be aware if you're running compositions that have some sort of sequence that has to happen in a row, like if you have a Jester who wants to Finale, or a Crusader who wants to Holy Lance, or a Grave Robber who wants to lunge, or a Highwayman who wants to Duelist Advance. Be aware of which classes are going in which order, because On Guard can screw up some of your combos that would normally work based on speed, that they might not work. For example, if you have a Jester who wants to Finale and you have a Man-at-Arms, and a Man-at-Arms is a stun class, it's really good if they can go first, and the Man-at-Arms is On Guard and the Jester doesn't, the Man-at-Arms is actually going to go ahead of the Jester sometimes, and you're probably going to want to stun with the Man-at-Arms on turn 1, which means you're going to screw up your Jester's ability to Finale. So just be aware of that when you're running On Guard quirks. Off Guard is the same exact thing except flipped over. You really don't want to be slow, and you really don't want to be slow on the first turn. Although I guess you could argue that if you surprise an enemy, it doesn't matter for the first round, but in general, you do not want to be slow in the first round. Photomania. This is an incredible quirk, one of the best quirks in the game. Minus 20% stress is as good as a Book of Sanity, which is an orange item, which is one of the more powerful items you can get in the game, and you can control the light in every single fight you want to do. So minus 20% stress for quirk is amazing. This is one of the instant locks if I'm going to be using a highlight run. And by that same logic, Phenogophobia is fucking terrible. Get rid of this as soon as you can. You never want to have plus 20% stress. It's a really big deal. All right, Precise Striker. We've already talked about 3% crit. I don't think it's all that valuable, and this is even more limited for melee attacks. It's okay. I'm gonna be happy if one of my melee damage dealers has it, but I'm probably not going to go out of my way to lock it in. Same with Weak Grip, but again, it's a negative quirk. Just remove your negative quirks, and you don't have to worry about how strong or weak it is. Just get rid of it. Quick Draw is basically as good as On Guard. I don't care about the 5 dodge at all. So Quick Guard and Slow Draw are exactly the same as On Guard and Off Guard, so just be aware of that. Basically, they're really good. Quick Reflexes. This is a super cool quirk because it's not related to light at all. So we had 2 speed quirks that were related to light, and this one's not. Again, speed is really good. Consistently going ahead of your opponents is awesome. Just be aware of the difference in speed between your healers and damage dealers so that you cannot lose characters so you don't get into a position where you're going to lose characters. This is amazing. Slow Reflexes, -1 speed across the board is almost always bad, so just get rid of that as soon as you can. Resilient, plus 10% stress healing received. This is as far as I can tell, this quirk is pretty much meaningless. I do a lot of stress healing, but most of the times when you're stress healing, a difference of 1 or even 2 points is going to be pretty non-impactful. And most times when you can set up a position where you can stress heal a lot in that position. So it's not really going to be impactful. I don't know of any fights where I'm racing with stress healing. Like I'm recovering with stress healing, but I'm never racing with stress healing. So I don't think anything of Resilient. I don't like that quirk at all. And by that same logic, Ruminator really isn't that big of a deal either. Robust. This one, I don't much care for Robust. Diseases are very impactful, and they're really annoying when you get them, but they're also very random and fairly rare. And you're not going to die to being afflicted by a disease. It might really screw you a little bit later, but in that moment you're probably not going to directly die to that. I don't think very much of Robust or Sickly. I don't really care about either of them. I won't lock in Robust, but I certainly don't want to have Sickly, but I don't go out of my way for either of those quirks. Runes Adventurer, we've already talked about Cove Adventurer, same exact logic. I don't care. I don't really feel like I can afford to specialize a character to a specific dungeon very often. So I will go out of my way to grab someone with Runes Adventurer to go to the runes, but I probably won't go out of my way to make sure someone has Runes Adventurer. But by that logic, again, I want all my characters to be able to go to all the dungeons they might be useful in, so I probably will be not real thrilled about Runes Phobe, although there are some classes that I don't really ever want to bring to the runes, like the Flagellant, for example, in which case I wouldn't be that worried if he had Runes Phobe. Second Wind. I don't like this. This is a damage buff of only 10%, which really isn't very much at all. That only comes applicable when your health below 50%. I'm not going to be super upset if it has no downside, essentially. Like, that's always a positive that is going to be there when I'm below 50% health, but it's just not going to be impactful very much of the time. Same with Tuckered Out. Again, just get rid of all your negative quirks. You won't have to worry about it. Skilled Gambler. Increases the chance of winning money or trinkets while gambling. I've used this once now, and it did nothing for me, but okay. I don't think very much of this quirk. I don't think very much of any of... I don't think there's very many of these. I think this is fairly unique, but I don't think very much of the in-town stress activity quirks as a whole. So this one I particularly don't care about. I would never lock that in. But again, I might stress heal in the gambling, in the tavern for gambling if I had this quirk, just because I think it would be kind of cool if my guy came back with a trinket. But I wouldn't do it on my way for that. Bad Gambler, don't care at all. If you have Bad Gambler on a character, you just don't send him gambling. Problem solved. I wouldn't even remove this one a lot of times. Whereas I've said basically remove all your negative quirks, this is one of the ones I probably wouldn't remove. I just don't care about it at all. It's not worth the money unless I'm trying to get rid of a locked-in quirk by winning the RNG in a dungeon. Slugger, we've talked about this. This is a worse lurker. Basically, it's only for melee attacks, but it's in all light levels. 10% is a very small amount. I'd lock it in on some melee damage dealers, maybe a Hellion, for example, but I wouldn't be that worried about it overall. Torn Rotator I'd get rid of. 5% is a very, very small amount. But however, you will lose you might lose 1 point of damage on this on some characters. It's just not a very big deal. But it's probably worth the money to remove again. Steady. This is okay. The magnitude of this is a little lackluster. So where some of the other ones like Photomania, where it's 20%, or the Haters, where it's 15%, this is only 10%. I probably wouldn't lock it in, but it is in all light conditions across all enemy types, so it's not bad. But it's not worth locking in my opinion. Nervous, don't like it. Of course, it's a negative quirk, get rid of it. And I don't want to have stress increased at all, ever. Stress faster. This is useless most of the time. You can't really plan around this. You're never going to be wanting to bring characters with 50 stress on a mission, and it's going to be pretty random whether or not a character gets 50% extra stress. So the vast majority of the times, you're going to have brought enough food anyways because you have to plan on them eating their full amount. And in the rare scenario where where the character is above 50% stress and you get a food ping, well, yeah, you saved one food, but that doesn't let you do anything. That would have to happen 4 times on one character for you to get an extra food ping out of it, and it just becomes meaningless. Stress faster is not a big deal at all. Don't get excited about that quirk. It's not very good. On the flip side, Stress Eater is a huge pain in the ass, because Stress Eater is one of the ones I am most concerned about, because it leads to more stress and sometimes damage to your group. Because when your character hits above 50 stress, which is random, suddenly he's eating 1 extra food for your party, and your carefully calculated amount of food that you brought, where you had 4 food pings or something, and now you're at the end of the dungeon and you've thrown out 1 pile of food because you only have a couple of rooms left, and you got a food ping, and instead you had 12 and you got a food ping, but he ate 5, and now you have 7 remaining instead of 8 remaining, which is only 1 food check as opposed to 2 food checks, and suddenly you get unlucky, and now bam, you get a bunch of stress and a bunch of damage. I hate Stress Eater. I get rid of that all the time as soon as I can, in the same way that I get rid of Tapeworm, for example. They both can screw you when you least expect it and least need it, and it's pretty RNG dependent if they do screw you. Thick-Blooded I really like for the same reason I like Clotter. Blights seem a little bit less common to me than Bleeds, but it's still very, very good to resist the things that's the #1 killer of all characters in this game, which are the dots. And by that same logic, Thin-Blooded is a big deal. Get rid of it if you can. Tough, I don't really care about it at all. Max HP is all right. I don't mind it as a stat, but it's rarely my maximum HP that gets me killed. Most of the time it is stuff like not resisting a blight. Because of the way the Death Door works, a little bit of extra HP tends not to be that big of a deal. Sometimes I'll use this on low HP characters. It's actually better. It gives me more absolute health on a character with more max health. But the characters with high max health, I don't tend to need to worry about having a little bit more max health, because it's rarely the case that a couple more health would have saved me, where it's often the case that if I had resisted the blight, it would have saved me. Fragile I will get rid of because it's a negative quirk and it's 10% max health, but it's not that big a deal. Hard Skinned is basically a better tough for most of the things. Against everything except dots, it's better because it makes you more efficient at being healed. It's all right, but it's roughly equal to tough for me, which is something I don't care about all that much. Soft is just a lesser fragile. It's whatever. I get rid of it, but I'm not super worried about it. Unholy Hater. We've talked about Beast Haters, Beast, Human, and Eldritch. This is probably the least good of all 3 of those. There are a couple unholy bosses where this is good on, but most of the time you just don't care about this. I certainly wouldn't lock it in. Fear of Unholy, same type of deal. Get rid of it. You don't want to have extra stress or minus accuracy versus random enemies. Unholy Hater, the accuracy is nice, but it's specific to Unholy, and again, Unholy is not a very important enemy type for most of the missions in the game. Satanophobia, you don't want free stress, so get rid of that. Unerring, we talked about 10% damage mods. This is the ranged one. There's a 10% for everything. There's a 10% at high light, a 10% at low light, a 10% for ranged, and a 10% for melee. I don't think any of them are that good. This one is okay on a couple character classes. Arbalest comes to mind. Scattering, not a big deal, but get rid of it if you can. Unyielding, I like Unyielding. I like anything that is going to make me more consistently not lose a character in a dangerous situation. I will lock this in a lot of the times, especially on very, very important characters like healers. I think it complements things like Clotter or Thick-Blooded very well, but I hate rolling against Death's Doors. So this is just the oh shit scenario. I really am pleased to have something. I mean, essentially it reduces your chance to die by a third, right? If you have a 33% base chance to fail a Death's Blow resist, this brings it down to a 20, I guess it'd be 23 in that scenario, which has removed about a third of your chance to die. But I still don't want to be counting on surviving Death Door checks to stay alive. So I like it. I lock it in. But I tend not to have it trigger very much in a game. Whereas like a speed buff or a damage buff or a stress resist buff is going to be active almost all the time when I'm playing. Unyielding is only going to come into play very rarely, but it does come into play when I most care about it. I get rid of weak grip on life for the same reason. It's a very kind of shitty debuff to have. I don't want to have my chance get increased by that large of amount to die. Warren's Adventure, we've talked about the adventures before. I don't care about them at all, but get rid of the negative version of it. Warrior of Light is the same as we've been talking about with the plus 10% damage. It's a fairly small amount. It's not that big of a deal. Light Sensitive, same deal. Not that big of a deal. You can control the light. In some scenarios like Dark Runs, you don't care about Light Sensitive at all. Wheeled Adventure, same as Warren's Adventure. Don't care about it, but I'll remove the negative version of it. So take home from this first set here, speed, really good. Stress resist versus certain types of enemies, and accuracy and damage and crit versus certain types of enemies, very good. The bleed, blight, stun resist, and death blow resist, all very good. The rest of it, I'll just leave it pretty much, don't really care about it. Oh, except the plus 20% stress resist versus highlight is really good too, Photomania. All right, let's go back to, or rather to the next round here. Armor Tinker, Backtracker. Okay, Armor Tinkerer, don't really care. It is a small amount of gold you save on that character, but and it's nice when you have these guys, but I don't go out of my way to get it. Backtracker, don't care whatsoever. You don't do a lot of backtracking, and when you do this, you're never planning it. You're never like making a group and going, oh, I got 4 backtrackers here. I'll be bringing these guys to this dungeon. You just don't care. It's just a very, very minor thing here. Balanced, 50% move resist. There are some classes this is good on. I'd say leper, but you're not bringing lepers to any dungeons, and you're not bringing them to boss fights. You don't really care. Don't bring lepers out of the. Don't even train lepers. It's not relevant. Hellion, this is particularly good on. The Hellion also has issues when she gets moved around, and she's very, very powerful in position 1 and totally useless in position 3 or 4. So can be nice to have balanced. But honestly, I think this is a lot less good than the stun resist, bleed resist, or blight resist. I'd never lock this quirk in, to the best of my knowledge. All right, I don't know why Cove Explorer is down here as opposed to up there, but Cove Explorer. Oh, these are scouting chance quirks, not the stress resist quirks. Okay, I like the Cove Explorer quirk. I won't lock it in because my characters tend to be generalists, not specialists for dungeons. But I love any scouting chance. Scouting chance is a very, very good attribute. When you scout a dungeon, it lets you use your items more efficiently, your consumables. It means you won't ever be surprised by a fight that you've scouted. It lets you find secret rooms for extra gold. It lets you figure out which room the boss is in. I know you can tell it's always the furthest the room from you enter, but sometimes that's a tie, so it lets you use your camping most efficiently. In general, scouting chance is really good, and 20% scouting chance is almost as good as a trinket. It's almost as good as the best trinket, and it's probably as good as the second best scouting trinket. So it's a big magnitude thing. And if you have a couple characters with this, or in a group, you're almost guaranteed to get a fair amount of scouting in that dungeon. I think it's really good. I wouldn't lock it in because mostly when I lock in quirks, I'm thinking about how are they going to help me versus the hardest fights in the game. Things like boss fights, things like Darkest Dungeon fights. But I do really like Explorer quirks. Scrounger's half as good as an Explorer quirk, but it's still decent. Fast Healer is totally useless. Healing skills while camping you just don't use healing skills while camping. So this is just, it has maybe the impact with the initial food you eat, and that's about it. Fated. I don't like this. If you miss, you get a 10% chance to hit. If you're capping out your accuracy at 90%, this would hypothetically mean you're only getting an extra 1% chance to hit. Now, I've also heard that if you have your accuracy at 90%, you can't miss. That seems weird to me, but there's weird things in Darkest Dungeon. If that is the case, that makes Fated even worse, because if you're capped on your accuracy, you're already not going to miss, and if you're not going to miss, having a 10% chance to hit when you missed is certainly useless. I suppose this would be useful. There would be the best case scenario for Fated would be if you had a leper who you never ran accuracy buffs on. Now, I don't know why the fuck you do that, but in that scenario, Fated would be better than it would be otherwise, but it would still be pretty bad. It'd still be worse than just 10 accuracy. So I think very little of this quirk. Healer's Gift, it's double as good as Fast Healer, but Fast Healer has 0 utility, so this is shit too. Meditator, I don't think very much of this at all. Yeah, the way the stress recovery buildings work, the more expensive the stress healing from the position 1, position 2, position 3, the more stress healing it does. Meditation is the least stress recovery done, and it gives potentially the Calm quirk, which is a minus damage bonus on the first round, which I don't like. I don't care about this. It will occasionally be useful, but I'm not going out of my way to get it. Nymphomania, I don't think anything about this. I rarely use the tavern as a whole. The tavern is worse than the whatever the religious building's called. So I don't tend to care about this whatever, and I would never lock in a quirk that gives me better stress healing at home. I would always lock in something that gave me something better in the combat or the missions that I'm doing instead. Runes Explorer, we've talked about Explorer quirks versus Scrounger quirks. I like the Explorer quirks. Don't care as much for the Scrounger quirks, but any scouting's good. Runes Tactician, I don't like these quirks because these are specific to an area as opposed to specific to a monster type, which means when you go into the areas where the extra areas that are out there now, especially things like all the Crimson Court DLC, all the new bosses like Shrieker or something like this, but more importantly, when you go to the Darkest Dungeon, this is not going to be useful to you at all. So I occasionally do look for characters who have Tactician quirks when I'm fighting a specific boss, but I'm not going to lock it in. Stout, healing skills while camping. Why are there 3 of these? Stout, Fast Healer, and Healer's Gift. It's hilarious. They're all terrible. Explorer, Scrounger, Tactician quirks we've talked about. Explorer, Scrounger, Tactician quirks we've talked about. And Tinkerer is as useless as Armor Tinkerer, the Weapon Tinkerer rather. It's a little bit of gold that you don't have to pay that you don't care about. So how good is it? Not very good. Okay, treatment quirks. These I care about a little bit. In my opinion, the best building to stress heal in is the religious building, and the best one of those options to heal in is the transepts. That's the absolute best one, right? Which is the prayer building, right? So the prayer one of those, and that's because the debuff it gives you is a quirk. It's a negative quirk that's not a big deal. So these are the quirks I believe that you can get from that interact with those. Enlightened. I don't really like Enlightened, but I'm not a big. It's not that big a deal. Meditating isn't the worst place to be. I don't care if I have to only pray for stress. That's the one I would use anyways. Flagellating is all right. It's a little bit more expensive, and it can have some. It can give you minus bleed resist and some other things like that. So I'm all right with flagellating for stress relief. I don't want to be drinking, gambling, or at the brothel. They give me all sorts of negative things. They can lose my trinkets. They can give me a number of negative buffs, and they can give me diseases. I tend not to be in the bar at all if I can avoid it. But these still aren't that important. Although the ones that make it so you can only go to that place are more obnoxious than the ones that make it that you can't go to that place. So there's one that's like I think they'll come up in a little bit. But there's one that means that you can only go to the bar versus you can go anywhere except the bar. Of course, the one that makes you only go to the bar is worse in general, except for the one that makes you except for God-fearing here. So in general, don't really care about these. These ones. Don't care about resolution at all, don't care about known cheat at all, don't care about deviant taste at all, and don't care about unquiet mind at all. I do care about witness, because as I said, I think the transept is the best place to cure stress in. Faithless, I would get rid of that as well if I can, because again, I like to use prayer as the stress recovery activity. Calm, kind of a big deal. It depends on the class. A lot of characters really do matter their damage on the first round. Any sort of back rank damage dealer in particular, this is a very negative thing for. Any sort of healer, this is a negative thing for. You often do damage with the healer on the first round. But something like a Plague Doctor, you don't care about your overall damage. Something like a Leper, you don't care what you do on the first round. Maybe some stress healers or stunners where the damage isn't such an important part of their initial attack. I'd get rid of it, but it's not that big of a deal. Claustrophobia is not a big deal at all. Although 20% stress in corridors does add up, I still don't think it's that big of a deal. You don't get the bulk of your stress doesn't come from walking around in corridors. It comes from the stress attacks that enemies do to you. Lagophobia. This one is a big deal, especially if you're playing on no light. If you're not playing on no light, this is only really going to fuck you on the Shambler, because the Shambler is always 0 light. But still, 20% stress in any scenario is a big deal to avoid. So get rid of that if you can. And Thanatophobia is also a really big deal. You can't control when you'll be below 50%, and it will happen at the worst times. And in the worst times, you don't want to be having something that also increases your stress more. So I'd get rid of that. Forced interaction quirks are some of the worst quirks in the game. These are my least favorite things to have. We should get rid of as many of these as we can. Evolution Mania isn't that big of a deal, except in the Crimson Court DLC. Stay out of that, but for a large portion of the time, this isn't going to screw you that much. A lot of the fountain items, even if you don't have the appropriate consumable with you, they still give you either positive things or very low negative things, so that's mostly okay. Bloodthirsty, don't like these particularly. Your characters can do stupid things with these and give themselves diseases or other nasty things from doing that. Impulsive's terrible. It interacts with everything. and just one fifth of the time it screws up something you're doing. At the moment, there is a bug in the game where if you have compulsive and you interact with the curio, so let's say you are interacting with the coral from compulsive, supposedly you can drag up the correct item as you do that and it will still interact appropriately. To the best of my knowledge, that is a bug, so I wouldn't get too excited about that. I expect that will be removed at some point. Curious is exactly the same thing as compulsive, so it's really shitty. These are some of the worst quirks in the game. Dacnomania is pretty bad as well, same as Bloodthirsty. Dark Temptation, this one's pretty bad as a whole because there's a lot of items that this forces you to interact with have really big negative outcomes, like huge amounts of stress, negative quirks, things like that. So you want to get rid of this one a lot. Demomania, same deal. Dipsomania, this one's not quite as bad. It will cause you to drink things a lot, like puddles and whatnot, but it can give you diseases, which is a bit of a problem. Egomania, I don't know what reflective is here, but it has screwed me up for some of the stress healing items. I'd get rid of it if you can. Same with Guilty Conscience, same with Hegomania. All of the ones that take control of your characters away are really bad because they're going to screw you when you least can afford it from something that should be avoidable, like not getting 50 stress from interacting with a curio in the dark or something. So these are all bad. Get rid of these as much as you can. Hegomania, Heromania, I don't know if these are indifferent. I think they're all exactly the same. Guilty Conscience, Hegomania, Heromania, all exactly the same. Hylomania is not too bad because mostly you'll interact with stuff where the downside of interacting with it is relatively minor. So you might have a chance to get bled or you might have a chance to get blighted, but it's not that big a deal. Kleptomaniac, however, is, because with Hylomania, the character will interact with something, but you still get the loot. With Kleptomaniac, the character actually just takes the loot from you. And you don't want your characters costing you 1,500, 3,000, 5,000 gold in a fucking mission. It's absolutely ridiculous. So get rid of that as soon as you can. This is one of the quirks that I won't stomach my characters having, that I might dismiss a character to get rid of Kleptomaniac, because it's just not worth it for me long run. Necromania is a bit of a problem. Corpses have a lot of disease-related stuff associated with them, or some negative quirks that you can get out of them, like thanatophobia, I think, comes from one of the coffins, or sarcophaguses, rather. I don't want people messing with corpses, so I try to burn that off as soon as possible. Paranomania, obsessed with the paranormal, roughly the same deal. This is going to cause you a lot of stress. Plutomania isn't as bad. It's very similar, I believe, to Hylomania. So again, it will force you to interact with treasure curios, but mostly treasure curios are fairly safe to interact with even if you don't have the right items. And Cetomania is quite bad as well because food is also the carcasses. They consider the carcasses food, and the carcasses have a lot of the disease-related things that Necromania does too, so I really don't like that one either. All right, and then finally, Corvid's Quirks here. Let's take a look at these. 8 accuracy and 8% scouting chance. That's really good. If you could pick that up, that would be fantastic. 8 accuracy is almost as good as a 10 accuracy trinket, which seems to be about what you're going to get on average out of a trinket. With a lot of characters, this will be enough accuracy entirely. So that's a really good one. And of course, scouting chance is really good. Corvid's Grace, this is nearly useless. 6 dodge is nothing. For the same reason I don't care about evasive, I don't care about the dodge portion of it. And move resist is nice to have, but a lot of characters don't really care. A lot of times if you have your characters even move one position, your comp is not a big deal. There are exceptions to that rule, but mostly I don't care about that. And disease resist we've talked about already. It doesn't seem to be that big of a deal most of the time. It's a nice convenient thing, but it's not that huge of a deal. So of these, I'd only really care about Corvid's Eye. The rest don't matter at all. On the other hand, his other ones are pretty nasty. Corvid's Blindness is a big deal. You never want minus accuracy quirk. Corvid's Appetite, 33% chance of interacting with food curios. Same reason I don't like Cetomania. I wouldn't like that one. There's a lot of diseases off food curios. And Curiosity, 27.5% chance of interacting with all curios. So this is an even worse curious or compulsive. So definitely get rid of that as soon as possible. All right, guys, I know this is just me reading a list for the latter half of this, but there's not much else. There's no other way that I can think of to really quickly address the huge number of quirks in this game. Hopefully you got a sense of how I approach quirks. I basically am looking at the positive impact on my characters, not only just on their day-to-day basis, but also on the hardest missions in the game. So that's really what you build characters for. You build characters for tackling the stuff that you have to beat in the game that's super hard, like the Darkest Dungeon stuff, or if you're doing certain types of runs, it's optional to kill bosses, but if you're doing challenge runs, it sometimes isn't optional to kill bosses. So itemize and quirk your characters for the content you're expecting them to need to face. and do your best to just keep all the negative quirks off. There's plenty of money in this game to do both of locking in the good quirks and removing the negative quirks, so go out of your way to keep the negative quirks off your characters, because it's essentially the equivalent of stacking 2 or sometimes up to 4 more trinkets on your guys just based on their quirks, and that's a huge impact. Anyways, this was a very highly requested video from you guys. A lot of you wanted to hear what I had to say about quirks, so this is what I had to say about quirks. Hopefully it was helpful. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you soon.